Hello everybody, my name is Murray and welcome to this Sunset Beach acrylic painting tutorial where we're going to paint this gorgeous sunset painting. I'm going to teach you how to paint an underpainting of a gorgeous sunset sky, how to mix these colours and effortlessly blend, how to use highlights and shadows and paint sunset clouds that look really realistic, how to use different brushes to make your life so much easier and different techniques to make these clouds look hyper realistic with very little effort, how to paint light on water and how to create realism and 3D waves, how to paint big waves and small waves that look far off into the distance and ones that look close to the beach, and lastly how to paint shallow water and sea foam to give your work a professional look with not much effort at all. So we're going to paint step by step this lovely Sunset Beach acrylic painting tutorial together. So let's get into it. Now we're not going to use many colours today, we're just going to use titanium white, cad yellow, cad orange, crimson, cerulean blue, ultramarine blue, dioxazine purple, light grey, dark grey and black. Don't worry if you don't have all those colours, we can always make them. Now all I've done, I drew an outline already with pencil of a sunset that I've kind of planned, and I just used bright cad orange to create an outline. So I've just got the video on a little bit of fast forward so you can just see what I was doing. All we're going to do, we're going to have some really low cool clouds that are sort of casting above the sun. We're going to have a horizon that we're just going to have kind of straight. We can fix it later with tape. We're going to have a big wave here in the distance that's like coming towards the beach. We're going to have some shallow water with some little waves. We're going to have a little bit of shiny sand, and we're going to have some dark sand. So look, I've done about half the canvas. It's an 8 by 10 inch canvas. I've done half the canvas as sky, and we're going to have half as the ocean. The sun's going to be in the middle. We're going to have this big wave that looks like it's crashing. We're going to have a few little waves and some shallow water that I can teach you how to make. And then we're going to have a lovely sort of glowing sand and then some dark sand. So if you'd like to pause the video and copy the outline, feel free to do so. And we'll get started. So get yourself comfy and we'll get going. So all I'm going to do is just get a brush and some white, and I'm just going to put a big blob of white in the center of my painting, and that's going to be our focal point. That's going to be our sun. And then all we're going to do, look, we've got some white and we're going to put quite a lot of cad yellow into the white to make a bright yellow. We've got a little bit of white just to make it a little bit more pastel than the actual color itself. So just a tiny bit of white. And all we're going to do, this is going to be around our sun. We're just going to create a bright yellow glow around our circle. So this is cad yellow and this is cad yellow deep hue. We're only going to use cad yellow today, but I just want to show you because sometimes obviously when you buy a paint, you can buy different shades of a color. So we want to just use cad yellow, just a bright yellow. And all we're going to do, we're just going to block in around that big white blob and just create the brightest part of our painting, which is going to be the glow around our sun. So really easy. We can even smudge our sun with our fingers. And then all we're going to do is just create sort of a lighthouse effect. So imagine like a torch coming down. This is going to be the sun reflecting and glistening on the ocean. So what we're going to do is we're just going to roughly paint a shape. So when we block in our painting later, we know exactly kind of where everything is going to be. So just kind of a nice glow. And then all we're going to do, we're just going to whiten it up by putting some white into our colour and making kind of a Naples yellow, which is basically the sort of colour of butter. So it's just a very buttery pastel yellow. And all we're going to do, we're just going to soften the sky around the glow. So the glow is going to be very vibrant and bright, but around it's going to be a bit less harsh. So we're going to use this lighter colour. Look, it's a lot lighter. The great thing is we've painted in our clouds. We can just paint around them or even over them and nothing's going to happen. So it's good rule of thumb to always paint your outline first. You can always dry your painting if you're worried about the orange mixing. So if you dry your painting with a hairdryer or just give it 5 minutes while you're setting up. And then look, all I'm going to do, look, I'm just going to gently blend it up to that bright yellow. Just so the bright yellow is only around the central sun. And we're going to create a lovely pastel sky. So we can't really go straight into blue just yet. We've got to kind of go from yellow to blue. And yellow and blue kind of creates green, but we're going to kind of try. So what we're going to do, we're going to get cerulean blue, which is a light blue, and ultramarine blue, which is a cool blue. And we're going to mix them together, and it's going to create sort of a royal blue. And all we're going to do is add lots and lots and lots of white. You can, if you want to, add a dot of purple and that'll cool it down even more. But we just want to kind of create this lovely pastel blue. So just loads of white. Acrylics always dry darker than you think, so it's better to go lighter than you think. So we're going to go really, really light and kind of create the colour that's next to it. And all we're going to do, we're going to put a bit of this buttery yellow into it. And it's going to kind of create like a teal sort of colour, like a turquoise colour. So we're going to test it out. We're going to put a bit more white. As I say, we want it really, really pastel. Because we don't want it too green. We don't want like a green sky. We want to kind of have this colour between blue and yellow that you get in the sky. So let's test it out. I think it's still a bit too dark. So as I say, be careful with your palette. So even though it looks incredibly light on the palette, it's better to go lighter than you think. So I'm just going to add a little bit more white and a little bit more yellow to that colour. And this is kind of like the in-between. So look, if you make a mistake like me and you've painted a colour that you don't like, don't stress. You can always go over it. So if you find in the tutorial that there's areas that you need to rework, you can always pause it and just go over the paint with a lighter shade. I do that all the time, which I'll show you. So look, all we're doing, we're trying to create this sort of gap between bright yellow and bright blue. So we just want it kind of fading into one another. So look, all I'm going to do, I'm just going to gently blend the two areas. And then this is our sort of light blue that we mixed earlier. So we can create that. Look, it's just white, cerulean blue and ultramarine blue. That's all it is. But it's got no yellow in it now. So lots of white, cerulean blue and a tiny dot of ultramarine blue. And you just get, look, a pastel blue. And we can mix that into our sort of teal sort of colour. So that turquoisey sort of colour. Look, we can just sort of gently blend it. So a lot of painting is just working on your transitions. And all a transition is a jump from one colour to another. So by just trying to learn how to blend and just taking your time, don't rush, and just gently blend colours, you can make this thing, which is like the underpainting, which basically, because it's so nice and blended, when we put things like the clouds and all the detail over the top, it tricks your eyes and it makes your work look hyper realistic for something that only takes about 5 minutes to do. So look, that's looking pretty already. So we're just getting darker as we go up. So we're just adding more blue and less white. So as I say, you can add a dot of purple if you want. So look, just more blue, just getting a shade darker as we move up. So all it is less white. Look. Just a little bit less white than it was before. And as I say, that colour that's mixed in the top corner has, I think, a little dot of purple just to make it a little bit cooler. So purple's really, really good for cooling things down. So if you ever add purple to a colour, you can get slightly cooler colours. So look, all I'm doing, I'm just speeding up the footage a little bit because all I'm doing is blocking in a soul colour. Just one colour, look. And as I say, I'm just gently blending it. Nothing hard. There's nothing you really need to concentrate on. And as I say, if you go over your orange outlines, don't worry. You don't have to paint them orange. I just thought orange was a good colour because mainly we're going to use orange today. And I think it just doesn't create a dark border. The one thing I would do if you're using colours, look, I'm just getting a bit more blue at the top just while I'm talking to you. I just added a little bit more of that cool blue. Yeah, one thing I would use is not a dark colour because the outline's meant to be soft. So if you use a warm colour. So all I'm doing now, I'm just trying to explain blending, which is basically creating sort of X shapes with your brush. And look, this is dry and it's dried quite scruffy. So if that ever happens to you and you find you've got some brush marks or you can see some canvas, you can always just create the same colours, look, and go over the top with a second coat of paint. So look, mine's really scruffy and I'm a pro. And look, mine's really scruffy and I've got to do that. So if you're painting along at home and you're thinking, why doesn't mine look really vibrant or neat? Sometimes it's just a case of giving it a bit of TLC and giving it a bit of love and just doing a second coat of paint. So all I've done here, I've just mixed some of that white and yellow, and while it's dry, look, I'm just blending this area so that transition, as I say, I don't want a jump in colour, I want it to nicely blend, so when we put the clouds over the top, everything looks really realistic. So there we go, just blend in this area just so there's not so much of a jump between yellow and blue. Easy peasy. So as I say, take your time. If you find the tutorial going a bit too fast, you can always pause it and go at your own pace. If you find I'm going too slow, you can always fast forward me. So there we go, look, we've got this lovely pastel background sky. We've got the glow around the sun. We've got this lovely teal sort of colour. We've got the lighter blue and then the darker blue at the very top. And then we've got this glow in the middle. And what it should do is it should get our eyes to look towards the middle. And with the darkened corners, that also helps to go towards the middle. So really, really easy. We've done that in what, 10 minutes? Really easy, great start for everyone. So we want to have pastel colours because things in pastel pushes it back. Things that are really harsh bring things forward. So let's do some clouds. So let's get some orange and yellow to make a peach colour. So if anyone at home struggles with how to paint sunset clouds, this tutorial is going to make it really, really easy for you. So all we're going to do is around the sun, same principle, just like we did with our bright yellow. We're going to use really warm colours around the sun. So we're using orange and yellow, which is kind of like a peach, bright sort of tangerine colour. And the clouds that are around that sun, they're going to be glowing because they're getting an incredible amount of heat as that sun sets. So we're going to use that lovely sort of orangey yellow and just sort of paint around that chunk there. So imagine these clouds are going and they're past and they're just getting all that heat. And what's great is, look, while we're blocking everything in, we can kind of put that on our wave because our wave would be kind of getting a bit of that colour. And even on our ocean. So we can go right up to that yellow and we can kind of see where everything's going to be. So this is sort of like the glow of light on our ocean. Because a lot of realistic painting is just knowing colours. That's the secret. It's not that hard, honestly. So once you know these secrets, you can create really good realism with not much technical ability, just colour mixing. So we're mixing orange and crimson to create sort of a dark sort of maroon colour. So these are cool colours on the right. And you can add a dot of purple, look, to cool it down. So warm colours such as orange and crimson will warm something up and make it look brighter and warm. And cool colours such as purple and blue will cool things down and make them look more grey. So light grey, I have a warm grey on the left for my warm section. And I have a cool grey on the right, which is a darker grey. The warm grey, just to make light grey, is just white, a tiny bit of black, and a bit of orange. So by adding grey to the mix, we can just make it very, very dark. But I think it's too dark. So as I was saying, we want to push these clouds far off into the distance so they look like we're looking out into the ocean. And I think because I've done them too dark, it's bringing it forward. It makes it look too near to the viewer. So we can test it out. So sometimes, as I say, even people like myself, you make a colour on the palette and you put it on the canvas and it doesn't look anything like it. It just looks so much darker. And obviously acrylics dry a lot darker. So we don't want that. We want to make it lighter. So look, we can add our light grey, which was just lots of white, some orange and a dot of black. And we can lighten up and then let's put a load of white into it to make it more pastel. So it's going to look very, very grey. We can even we can cool it down with purple if it's too orangey. So look, we don't want to have it too far forward. So let's make it more grey. And look, as I say, even when the paint is wet, you can just paint over it. So even me, I make mistakes all the time. I'm forever correcting things. So look, you can always just paint over things. And don't worry about the shapes of your clouds just yet. I'll show you how to make them look hyper realistic in a minute. We just want to work on the colour blending first. So look, you can just paint over them. So I'm just going to put the speed up a little bit just while I block in the rest of them. All I'm doing is blocking them in with the exact same colour. As they go up, they might just look a little bit lighter because obviously I've painted over the darker shade at the ones in the bottom. But as I say, sometimes with acrylics, you can just go over things twice. So if you find that an area is dried a bit flat or is dried a bit dark or a bit light, you can just go over it with a lighter shade or a darker shade to lighten or darken it up. So there we go. Just blocking all these colours in. So the ones as they go up, they look a bit more warmer, they look a bit more orangey, but I think it's just because they've got not that dark paint underneath them. But it kind of looks cool. So as Bob Ross would say, a happy accident. So don't worry. So there we go. Let's just do this last one. There we go. So everything's kind of blocked in. We know where everything's going to be. Now there's a big jump in the middle. So why don't we create a sort of middle colour to sort of bridge the gap between the warms and the colds? So by mixing orange and crimson, we can kind of create sort of a maroon colour, sort of like a burgundy. So it's still very, very warm because crimson's a warm colour and orange is a warm colour. So it's kind of like a dark red. So what we could do, sometimes you get these lovely sort of sunset clouds on the horizon and it looks like it's sort of fading into the ocean. You have these sort of little ones. So we can get that colour and we can even make it warmer or cooler. Whatever we want to do. So let's make it nice and bright. Let's add a little bit of white just so it's not so harsh. So orange and crimson, two warm colours and a little bit of white. And look, this area where it's going really, really grey, why don't we warm it up? So just remember what I said at the beginning. Around the sun is going to be incredibly warm. It's going to be incredibly bright. So by using warm colours and soft colours, we can push it back. But can you see how it's starting to trick your eyes now? How look, just going over it in these colours and making it look really realistic, but there's no detail. How fantastic is that? So that's what I'm saying. If you work on your colour mixing, you can make your work look really, really realistic with not much effort. So look, just think of the areas that would be getting sunlight. So like the tip of this cloud is right above the sun. That might be getting some heat. So we could add a little bit of this burgundy colour. Even this middle one. So try to think where the sun would be. So look, if there was a glow or a torch right underneath these clouds, that would sort of be heating up on their underneath, on their bellies. So we can use that colour, that orangey colour. There we go. So we've got this lovely glow now. Everything's starting to look really cool. We can work on our blending and things in a minute. Now the opposite, so if you think of yin and yang, if this area is going to be really, really warm, all the outer areas are going to be really in the dark and in the shades because they're not getting much of the light. So they're going to cast really harsh shadows. So we can use our cool colours. So these are our warm colours. And we can use our cool colours now. So all we're going to do, we're just going to create a cool sort of version. So we've got the highlight, the warm colour. And all we're going to do, look, we're going to mix orange and purple together. So orange and purple, and you get kind of like a dark grey, like I've got at the bottom. So orange and purple, you get this sort of cool grey. My purple's really cool. You can make it with pink and blue. So if you haven't got a really cool purple, if your purple is a bit more crimsony, you can always cool it down with pink and blue. But as I say, blues always cool things down. So look, we're just making a sort of cool grey. It's got a bit of white in it to make it not that harsh. And all we're going to do, look, these areas are going to get less sunlight. So they're going to be a lot cooler in colour. And then we can frame our painting again by using cool colours on the edges. And what it'll do, as I say, everything's repeated. It's the same lessons over and over again. It will get you to look towards the middle, which is what we want to do as artists. So look, if that's my hand, that's the cloud. Look, the heat and the light would be at the bottom and the outer bits would be the shadow because the light's coming from the bottom. Hope that's easy to understand at home. So there we go. Let's just do these ones in the corners a little bit darker. This one up here. So as I say, just take your time. There's no rush. Enjoy yourself. Try to relax. Painting's really, really good for grounding you and relaxing. Have fun with it. Don't take it too seriously. So there we go. So we've got this lovely background that's all blocked in. Really happy with that. And as I say, we can spend 5 minutes just refining it. So let's get some of our yellow and orange. And let's get a smaller brush. And look, we can just spend a couple of minutes just refining things. Look, all I'm doing is the glow around the sun. I'm just using some of that yellow and orange, and I'm just working on the transitions. So a good rule of thumb is to block the paintings in, work on your transitions, and then put the fine detail on last. So think of building a house. You wouldn't just put a door and carpet on it. You have to build the foundations. So think of like that with painting. All we're doing first is blocking everything in. Then we're just trying to get all our colours to look seamless. And then we can work on the fine detail last. So if we kind of do like a 3-step method, it's really, really easy. So I'm just blending all this area. So there's the subscribe button. If you haven't subscribed already and you're finding all these tips really, really useful and handy, please like the videos and please subscribe. There's over 160 real-time step-by-step tutorials now on the channel, so you can binge. There's lots of playlists. And if anyone has any ideas for tutorials, please put them in the comments below and I'll happily try to put things into a tutorial. Lots of people have been asking for different landscapes and flowers and animals, so hopefully we can start including things like that for everyone. So there's no wrong ideas. So if you've got any ideas, just put them in the comments below the videos, please. So look, all this area is going to be nice and warm. So we're using this bright sort of peachy colour. And everything's starting to blend into one another now. It's starting to look really seamless. And we haven't even done the detail yet. So if it's looking this cool already, wait till we do the detail. That's the whole thing. So look at that. That's looking really nice. That glow's looking really nice. All these areas look like they're sort of glowing in the heat. We've got our small brush, and what I would like you to do, if you could dry your painting, you can either leave it for 5 minutes or just dry it with a hairdryer. And remember all the colours that we use for our background sky? Well, now we're going to do a thing called sky holes, which is basically, think of Swiss cheese. We're going to poke holes into our clouds from the background. So all I'm going to do is match the background colour. So at the bottom, do you remember it was white and yellow? And I'm using a really tiny brush. And look, I'm just going to poke holes in my clouds and change the shapes of my clouds. Now this is the bit where it goes from looking a little bit realistic to looking super realistic. And literally it takes 5 minutes. So if someone taught me this years ago, I kind of figured this out because I'm self-taught. But if someone taught me this years ago, I would have literally bitten their hand off because this is a game changer. So look, all we're doing, look, is you're getting the background colour. You're getting a really small thin brush. So imagine like a thin pencil. And you're just poking holes and changing the shape of these clouds. Now, I make a lot of these paintings up just out of my imagination because I paint sunsets for a living. But you can get a reference photo. So if you find like you're not very good at just thinking where things are, like as I say, I do this all the time, so I can just do it sort of out of my imagination. But you can always use a reference photo at home. So you can just go on Google or whatever it is and just look up sunset clouds and you can kind of get a reference photo. So look, as we go up, I've got that kind of teal colour. That was the really light blue, lots and lots of white and a tiny bit of yellow. And I'm just matching the colour and I'm just doing the same trick. So I've just sped the footage up a tiny bit. But all it is rinse and repeat. But can you see it now? How realistic it's starting to look already? And don't worry if some of the areas, look, if you're going over the clouds and some of the areas look a bit scruffy and obviously you're painting over paint and they look okay when you're doing it, but later on they might dry a bit dark. Look, so there's areas that look a bit dark. because what it's happening is the cloud underneath it is shining through the lighter pastel colour like this yellow. Don't worry, you can always dry the painting, and as I say, just give it a second coat of paint. So that is the difference. I don't think a lot of people tell you these sort of tips when they're doing these tutorials. They're not necessarily sharing everything. We live in a culture when a lot of people are in it for themselves and they don't really share their secrets, or they charge you everything to do it. So I'm not like that. I kind of think everyone should help each other. So look, all I'm doing now is getting some white and blue, and I'm just poking some holes, look, into the clouds. So I'm just matching every time the background sky, just doing the same trick. Whoops, got a bit of thick paint there. No bother, let's just turn it into a shape. So as I say, don't ever fret. Don't ever worry. There's nothing you can't correct or paint over. There we go, let's do the top bit. Ooh, she's looking so pretty already. So this one, let's just make it into a cool shape. Let's put some more yellow. Look, as I say, I'm just going over it with a second coat of paint just to make it look brighter. Look at that. Look how cool that looks. So I'm super happy with that. Look, so we've got this lovely glow. We've got these great transitions in our clouds. And now we can work on our ocean. So we can do a similar thing with the ocean. We can dry our painting. We can get some painting tape if we need to. But I'm going to kind of block it in by hand, and then I'll put some tape on in a minute. The reason I use painting tape is really, really good to get a straight horizon. So all I'm going to do, we're just going to make the same colour we just did for the clouds. Mine's dried. It's incredibly hot here in London and mine's dried. So all it was purple. As I say, you can add ultramarine blue to cool it down if you want to, and some orange. Oops. And you should get this dark grey that I've got pre-mixed, but that's how you make it. And all I'm going to do, look, it's just at the very bottom of the painting. I'm just going to block in some dark sand. So this is the sand. Obviously sand is normally like a whitey yellow colour, but obviously it's so far away from the sun, it's going to be almost silhouetted in the dark. And then all I'm just going to do, look, I'm just going to get some more purple and a little bit of black, just a little bit of black, and just in the corners I'm just going to make it a little bit darker. We can always sort it out later. We're just kind of blocking it in. We want dark corners at the bottom, just like we want dark corners at the top to get you to look towards the middle. But on the left hand side, I want a dark corner because I'm going to sign it there. So I need a corner, I need a dark colour so my signature can show up. So let's clean our brush and get some orange and crimson. And let's just block in the ocean. So we've kind of got, look, the same colour as the clouds, and we're just blocking the ocean. But again, I think I've gone a bit too dark. I think just for this ocean, look, what we want it to be deep water. So we want it quite dark because it's the farthest bit of the ocean, but obviously it's being glowed by the sun. It's being heated up by the sun. So I think it's a little bit too dark. So let's do our trick again. Let's add our light grey, our warm light grey, and let's just colour over it. So I think that's a bit better. There we go. So it's kind of the same colour as the clouds. There we go. Just got less crimson because the great thing about light grey, it kind of neutralizes colors and it makes it less bright, so it makes it less cartoony. Acrylics always look a little bit cartoony because they're high pigment. Oils always look a little bit more realistic, but acrylics are so easy and forgiving and they're really cheap, so they're great for people who are starting out and want to learn. So look, as we get closer to the beach, the water is going to get more shallow. So what we're going to do, we're going to make it more lighter in colour. So if you imagine the ocean far away is going to be really, really deep. But as we come towards the beach, it's going to get shallower and shallower. So we can trick the eyes by adding some orange to make it look warmer. Adding our light grey to suck some of that colour out and make it more realistic. And then we can add loads of white to make it look more pastel. So look, it should make a much lighter colour. Let's add a tiny bit of purple, just so it's a bit more grey. And then by adding a sort of medium colour, it looks gradually that the water, as it's coming, let's go over the top. I think let's make it the whole thing a little bit lighter. But what we should do, just like we did with the background sky, as we come towards the beach, we want it getting lighter. So just like we did with the horizon in the background sky is the lightest colour, and the top of the sky is the darkest colour. We're kind of doing the same on the water. So we just block this in. You can use a big brush if you find that easier. So there we go. And then we're going to add more white to our mix. Get more pastel, a little bit more orange, a little bit more purple to make our mix. Still grey. And then let's just paint the bottom of this bit in. And what we should have... Do you remember everyone who did the beach the other day when we did the tropical beach and we had sort of like turquoise water and it got more light in colour as we came towards the beach? Well, this is the same principle, but obviously we're using much warmer colours. So look, and all we're doing, we're just gently blending it, just like we did the background sky. So our transitions are really, really soft. Everything looks really real. Don't worry about the orange in the middle. We're going to blend all that in the middle and the yellow. We just want a kind of nice transition in the background. So as I say, we'll blend all this area. So why don't we get some of our orange and yellow? Sorry, it's just off camera. I'll move the palette in 2 seconds. So let's get some yellow and orange. Let's add a bit more yellow this time. So I've just got a little bit more yellow. And all we're going to do, look, we're going to just create that glow, and we're just going to work on the blending, just like we did on the clouds. So we're going to go from bright yellow in the middle to this sort of really, really lovely orangey yellow. And we're going to come down, look, and we're just going to create a glow on the ocean. And this is going to look like glimmering light. Because we've done it one side, look, we can do it on the other side, just so it all matches. Here we go. And then we can come out, look, from the middle. And we can start now, just getting a little bit darker. So we're just going to add more orange. Tiny bit of crimson. So more orange than crimson. Tiny bit of grey, just to make it look real. And some white. So because it's got lots of orange, it's very warm. So look, it's very, very warm. And what we're going to do, look, either side... We're just going to try to gently blend this in. So it's slightly darker. It's got much more orange. And it should, look, it's starting to trick your eye just like it did with the clouds. It should start looking really, really real. Like a glow. So it's the same principle, the same foundation. Paint the background, the underpainting first. Then work on all the shapes and all the transitions, and then put the fine detail on the top, like the waves. So we're doing the exact same thing. So look, we're just gently blending it together. We just want all these transitions to be really, really soft. So just look, move your brush, be really, really gentle. Just go back and forth, back and forth. Don't push too hard, ease up on the brush. Look at that. Ooh. So cool. So I love what I do. So when I do things and it comes out good first time, I get excited. Do you know how hard it is to paint and comment and talk and think of cameras at the same time? And men aren't very good at multitasking, as you all know. So all I'm doing, look, I'm just getting some cad yellow in the middle. So trying to operate a camera and paint can be challenging, to tell you the truth. So I'm just going to get some orange now. And I'm just going to make it more orange as I move away from the middle, just like the ocean. And then just use our darker orange that we just made for that glow, either side. Now, the wet sand is when the water retracts back, you get this lovely glistening sand, and because of the light that's shining down, it will look like a mirror. So that's why it's so bright. It's just that sunlight looking like a mirrored floor, like a marble floor, shining off. And then let's get some orange, and let's just make this glow just with pure orange, cad orange. Let's just gently blend this area so there's not so much of a jump. So if you imagine just around the sun, all that water, all that deep ocean will just look like it's on fire, like it's glowing. So there we go. We can just make that effect just by gently blending. Wow! So look, we can dry our painting. Please dry your painting so you don't put any tape on your painting when it's wet. So please dry your painting. If you measure a straight line, you can just get a straight horizon. And what we're going to do, we're just going to mix some crimson and orange. So it's always kind of the same palette all the time. And we're just going to put our light grey in it. And we're just going to make, again, the same sort of colour as the clouds. Just add a little bit of purple to turn it more grey. So it's still going to be very warm. And all we're going to do, now we've got our tape, we're going to go right up to the edge of the tape. And we just, because we've got a small brush, we can create kind of straight lines. Don't worry if they're a bit wonky. Waves are wonky because obviously they're moving. But we kind of want to go straight up to the tape at either side. And what it should do is just try to create like a divide between the clouds and the horizon. And look, we can just, you can barely see it, but all I'm doing is just straight, excuse me, I can't talk. All I'm doing is just creating wiggly lines that are going across the ocean, just to give the impression of little faraway waves. So they're just tiny little lines. I've got a really thin brush. I'm just creating little divots. And it just looks like faraway waves in the distance. I'm leaving a gap in the middle. So if I zoom in, you can see them a little bit clearer. Let's just get a bit darker. Look, I've just added a bit more purple there to our mix. I've just added more purple, just to create that dark grey sort of colour. So it's the same colour as we used for the darkest bits of the cloud. And now this wave, if you imagine it's closer to the viewer, it's going to cast a bigger shadow because it's really powerful and it's big and it's going to have a big shadow. But also because it's nearer the viewer, it's further away from the sun. So we don't want to use black, because if we use black, it's going to kind of bring it really, really close. And we want to keep our darkest darks for right next to the beach. So this wave is kind of near us, but it's still quite far into the distance. So by using this purpley crimson orangey mix, we can create this sort of warm grey that we can create a shadow, but also it keeps it a little bit far back. It's not as harsh. So let's create the shadow of the wave kind of crashing down, and then create the outline. So I'm trying to create kind of like a tube that's going across. So what I'm doing, look, I'm deliberately leaving a gap in the middle because we're going to use warmer colours in the middle, and we're going to use this cooler grey either side. So it looks like the sunlight, just like our cloud in the middle. So look, we can go back to the previous colour we made, and we can use that in the middle. So look, we can use that in the middle. It's just a shade lighter, it's got more orange in it. So it's the same rule of thumb. We want warm colours, look, and we can get our crimson and orange and use that. That's more reddy colour, wasn't it? Look, and we can link the area in the middle. And what it should do, look at that, is look like your wave is glowing in the sunlight. Woohoo! So can you see it's the same trick over and over again? It's not a new trick, it's the same one. We're just adjusting it. So look at that glow now. So that's kind of cool. That's all blocked in. We can change things if we need to afterwards. So let's get our crimson and orange. And in the middle here, let's create some bigger waves so you can see them. I'm using a flat-headed brush, which is kind of like a flat head. And all I'm doing, I'm just using that really thin edge. And I'm going right up to the tape. And I'm just going across the page, just trying to create the illusion of waves. So if I zoom in so you can see a little bit better. So let's have some big ones coming towards the shore. So look, all I'm doing, I'm using this really bright reddy crimson, orange and crimson mix around the middle. I'm sort of leaving gaps before I get to the edges. I'm just using the little flat brush just to create scoops. Just create some waves. Let's have some in the middle, just really fine. There we go. And then let's go back to our darker colour, which had loads of purple in it to make it cooler. Just going to mix some more of it because I've run out. And the same colour as the wave, look, we can just go towards the outer edges and we just do the exact same thing. And what it should do, again, if we work on the transitions in the middle and link the two areas together, it should look like waves either side of the middle being darker and the ones in the middle being really bright. So let's do the other side just so it matches. There we go, let's do a few off in the distance. And then this dark grey that we've got, as I say, you can add a tiny dot of black. Look, you can always go over it and darken it up. So if you find that it dries a bit light because obviously all that underpainting is there, you can always go over it. And with that really sharp edge, look, I'm just going to create a shadow. So when we have our wave coming up towards the beach, we're just going to have an outer rim, just creating a 3D shadow. So there we go. Let's say we can refine everything. Don't worry if you have bits of canvas showing, things like that. We can work on things as we go along. So let's say, just like highlights, if you want to make something brighter, you can just go over the top in like yellows and whites to make things like your sun and your glisten brighter. You can do the same with shadows. So look, I can make areas darker by just giving it 2 coats of paint. So look, we're going to mix the two areas together. So we've got our cool grey and we've got our warm orange and crimson. We're going to mix the two together, sort of meet in the middle. And we're just going to link the two areas. I'm just going to paint the rest of this wave that colour. Just because it's kind of got its back to the sun, it's going to be quite in the shade. So while I've got that colour, let's just do either side. Let's try to get rid of this white canvas. So we're trying to create like the barrel effect, but you've got to remember the sun's going to be sort of cascading down. So I'm going to shade it a little bit here and either side. But I want to leave the middle because obviously we've got that sunlight glowing on it. I'm just going to make it a little bit darker underneath. As I say, I don't want to use things like black because I don't want to make it too dark. But if you do, look, if you make an area too dark or too light, you can always change it. As I say, we can always change things about. So I'm just going to create quite a dark shadow underneath the wave. It's quite a mean big wave. And then just do the top bit just to reinforce that bit. Just so that line's a bit more prominent. And I'm just going to link these areas where there's a bit of a jump in the transitions. There we go. And then just going to mix a little bit more orange. As I say, just linking these areas. Just so it looks really natural. So just like the clouds, as I say, rinse and repeat. We're just trying to match everything up. And then we can put our detail over the top. We can put our sea foam and everything over the top. So now let's get some bright yellow. Let's find a clean bit of the palette. So let's get some bright yellow and white. And let's make that really bright yellow. So let's get a small brush. Let's move our tape. We should have a perfectly straight horizon. Well, hey, look at that. That looks cool. And then all we're going to do, look, we're going to go down. You could have kept your tape on, but I'm feeling confident, so I'm just going to go below my sun. And all I'm doing, I'm just creating straight lines going across, to create the illusion of the sunlight glistening on the ocean. So I want it coming down. Let's have a bit on our wave, just so it looks like it's all glowing. Just coming either side of the middle. So I'm trying to stay kind of straight. Sort of fanning it out as we come down towards the beach. So let's continue it towards the beach. So let's keep going. Now we've got all this area blocked in. Look, we can put this detail on the top. Make it look realistic. So a lot of this area we're going to put sea foam on, but we still want this glow underneath. So when we work it in a minute. And let's have a little bit on the wet sand, just so it looks like it's glistening in the sunlight. Just so it's all matching. And then what I'm going to do with my really thin brush, look, I'm just going to come away from the middle and just try to create these lines going across. And these just look like caps of waves. So again, it's just really, really subtle. Now if you clean your brush and we make the colour that we had previously, so do you remember it was white, lots and lots of white, cerulean blue, a little bit of ultramarine blue and a dot of purple. So we can get this colour. We can load up our little brush and we can start putting the foam, our crushing sea foam on our wave. So in the middle, we're going to leave a little gap because obviously that's where the sunlight's going to be. And then either side, we don't want to use pure white. So we've got this hint of blue in the mix in our colour. Because obviously it's getting a bit of shadow because it's far away from the sun. And then what we can do, look, while we've got that colour, why don't we start doing our outer edge for our water coming up onto the beach. So again, we're just going to do the middle. We're just going to do this really thick outer edge where you get all the sea foam and you get the froth as the water comes up towards the beach. So we're just going to leave that little bit at the middle of our big wave because that's going to be sort of getting bleached in the sunlight. But we can put some foam either side here. And let's say we can just go over it if we have to. And then if you think just like the middle with the shadow, we can mix this colour, which all it is less white and a little bit more purple. So it's just cerulean blue, ultramarine blue, white, purple and just less white this time. So it's a little bit darker, a bit more bluer. And look, either side, because it's slightly got less white in it and it's just got a little bit more purple and blue, it's just a bit darker. And again, it would just look more natural. We can do the same either side. So this is all the froth as that wave is crashing into the beach. So we can create that. And let's say if it dries a bit flat, we can always go over it again because it's going to be absorbing lots of the orange underneath. So if you find it looks really blue at first, but then it dries and it looks a bit flat, you can always go over it. So there we go, we're just going to gently blend it towards the middle. And it should, again, look very natural. And then if we get some white and orange and yellow. So if you clean your brush or use a different brush and get some white, orange and yellow to get sort of this peachy colour. We can just kind of do the foam in the middle. So let's just do the foam. Now it's kind of lost. I think in real life that's kind of how it would look. But let's just get some of our white and blue and let's just go over the top. And because that paint's wet, it will kind of mix together. So it'll be very bright. It will look a lot lighter. But that kind of looks realistic. There we go. So let's go back to our white and blue. And I'm going to teach you how to paint sea foam. But I've just noticed, look. Oh no, I've got black all over my painting. Ah, the rage. Right, so this is a good trick. Baby wipes. If you find that you make a mistake or you dip your hand in paint like I tend to do every bloody painting. Look at this. I've got my hands are absolutely covered in paint. If your work is dry, you can just use a baby wipe, look, and you can just go over the top and take any mistakes off. And if you have a little scratch on your canvas like I have because it wipes a bit of the underpainting, don't worry, we can always paint over it, so don't fret. But baby wipes are really, really handy because if you're painting a section of your painting and it goes a bit wrong, you can just wipe it away. So look, all I'm doing, I'm getting some light of whitey blue and I'm just getting my really thin brush, and I'm kind of creating like lightning bolt shapes, sort of like zigzags. And some of them I'm linking to the very bottom of that thick border, and some, look, I'm just doing little random splats and wiggles. So some I'm linking to the border, and some I'm just doing dots to look like bubbles and froth. And then now when we have waves, because we've created our 3D waves, we can always have this froth kind of going over the top or going underneath it. So look, you can kind of create sort of like, imagine if we went underneath, the wave is kind of broken over. So that's my hand trying to explain that. So look here, I put way too much paint on. But look, don't worry, look, we can just create it into a big bit of sea foam going over the top of the wave. Look, and we'll just make it go over the top. So as I say, don't worry about it too much. But again, by laying all that foundation, we can kind of make everything look really realistic. So let's just link some to the edge. Now, as we go from the middle, we're kind of going like a triangle. So think of like a triangle. We're kind of going out diagonally towards the outer corners. Look, I'm kind of going outwards. So look, imagine there's a point like a triangle. We're trying to go out, and that should make your work and your painting again look more 3D. So that's another little tip. We're just going to leave the middle. So we're going to just link this area, but we're going to leave the middle where it's yellow. Don't fill that in first, please. So leave that area there. We just have a few either side of the waves. And then we're going to swap to our darker blue that we mixed earlier, which is the same colour but just less white and a bit of purple. And all we're going to do, we're going to rinse and repeat. We're just going to do the same trick. Look, I can even go over this if it's dried a bit flat. Look, I can make it a bit more neater and blue. It's the same here. Look, if it's dried a bit rubbish, you just fix things. And look, it's exactly the same. And what we're going to do now is just link it to that previous colour. So again, all the transitions, just like the sky, just like the clouds, just like the waves. Same trick. So look at that. So now we can start going a little bit faster. We can start linking areas. You can see how quickly it's starting to look really, really real. So just like the clouds, don't be impatient when you're first doing all the first steps. Because if you don't do all the first steps in the underpainting, when it comes to this bit now, it won't look as good. So as I say, take your time. Just relax. So there we go, just adding all this sea foam. Now all I'm going to do now, I'm really, really happy with the painting, but there's a few bits that we just need to refine. So the next 10-15 minutes, all I'm going to do is just neaten everything up. So this is the difference between something looking really, really good and something looking amazing. It's just spending 10-15 minutes on something at the end and just noticing areas that you need to rework. So here, just little areas when I've added things, I've changed things. Like here, look, it looks a bit scruffy. I can go around it. Things like my darkest darks, if I want them darker, I can just give them a second coat of paint and bring out that sort of dark shadows. If I want my highlights to be brighter, I can get a clean brush and I can do the opposite and use bright colours. So let's add some little waves off into the distance. Just using a thin brush just to make it look more 3D. And down here, when you get wet sand, you tend to get like a really dark outer border on the sand. So let's create a dark border. So that is cool. And then I've got a clean brush and I've just got white straight from the tube. Literally a clean brush. I'm just going to make that look incredibly bright. And I can get some of my sort of Naples yellow that we mixed. And I can sort of come out from the middle, sort of create the illusion of waves and shimmer. So all these little things, as I say, you know, the great thing about art, it's mainly intuitive, it's very right-brained. So a lot of our society obviously is very logical and everything's organised and planned. Well, a lot of painting isn't like that. So as I say, doing tutorials, they're great, step by step. But a lot of painting is intuitive and it's just taking a step back, being present, relaxing, and then letting your intuition go, oh, this bit I'm not happy with, this bit I like, and just listening to that and just reworking areas. So I often step back from my paintings and like just have a look at them, see what I've missed. So look here, this could be a lot neater. Let's get some of that orange and crimson. Even here, look, the shadow would be lit up. So that's a bit I haven't noticed. We can change that. We can make this wave look a bit nicer. Look. As I say, it's just spending a few minutes just correcting things. So that is so much nicer. I think these waves look a bit scruffy, so let's clean these up. See, I could edit all this out, but it wouldn't be being honest. Do you see what I mean? Like if you suddenly see the jump from where we were to all these last finishing touches, but it's these finishing touches that make the piece. So let's create some more little waves. So let's have some red ones that are glistening in the sunlight. Nice and warm. Let's put some sky holes. So some of my sky holes look a bit rubbish, where the paint has absorbed some of the colour from the clouds. So I can go over them and just make them a bit neater. Like here, look, just by adding more yellow. Just look, this one looks a bit too dark. So look, just going over it with a second coat of paint. Look how much brighter it looks. Let's see here, look at that. What a difference, just how much brighter. Just giving it a second coat of paint. If you want to change the shape of your clouds, look, I don't kind of like this one. I kind of fiddled with it. And then I thought that looks even worse. Why did I do that? So I could always go back and correct it. So look, I didn't like it, so let's put some orange back in. Let's change the shape kind of back. So there's nothing, as I say, you can sort of experiment and try things out. Now let's get some black. We'll save our darkest darks to the very bottom. Let's darken up the very bottom just with a tiny bit of black and some of that dark grey, because we're going to sign it in the bottom left hand corner, and I want to darken up the corners to get you to look towards the middle. But look, black is so dark that it kind of brings everything towards it. It's like a black hole, if you see what I mean. So you don't want to use pure black. You can add a bit to your grey, but don't just use pure black. So, and then all I'm going to do is that dark purpley, which was orange, crimson, purple and light grey. So orange, crimson, purple and light grey. We're just going to make a darker version. And look, all I'm going to do is come in from the sides. So these bits of the far off wet sand are going to be quite dark. And that light is going to be coming down the middle. And all the rest is kind of be in sort of silhouetted and dark. So we're going to try to imply that. And we can go over the edges of our water as well. So we're just glazing it. We're just colouring it in. We can put back our detail in a minute, but look, all we're doing is we're coming in from the side towards the middle, and we're just easing up on the brush just so it nice and blends. And again, that gets you to look towards the middle by just shading the sides. So let's do it on the other side. I'm just going to speed it up now. Now you know how to do it. I'm just going to glaze over the top to get you to look towards the middle. And as I say, because I've done that, I've kind of gone over all my sea foam. So I'm just going to spend 2 minutes just fixing that. So again, it's just experimenting with things. It's seeing bits that you've gone over. But as I say, it's not like A, B, C, D where you're following steps in a logical order. You kind of do everything where you go back to bits, then come forward, and you go back, go left and right. That's the thing with art, it's all over the shop. And you have to get used to that, okay? So if you have like a logical brain, I think sometimes that's quite difficult for people. So just around here, I'm just going to get a clean brush. I'm going to mix some of our yellow and white. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to do the same trick with our kind of wiggly worms, sort of lightning bolts. And I'm just going to do some ones in bright yellow and white. And these are all the bits of the sea foam that are glistening in that sunlight. So as they come down the middle, that bits of sea foam, look, I can just glaze over the top. Look, I can just colour. All this area is dry. I can put some in the middle. And again, it's just linking these transitions all together. So when you look from afar, this should look pretty photorealistic. So I can even put like some white and yellow in the middle just to make this look a lot brighter. So that's looking so cool. It gives it such a punch. It makes it look, whoops, it makes it look so much more realistic. So as I say, these last few minutes just working on things makes all the difference to your work. Let's do some just underneath the sun, because that's going to be incredibly bright and vibrant. Look at that. So if I zoom out, so even here, look, it looks darker now. It looks so much better. Everything's looking pretty photorealistic. Let's get some purple and some of that dark grey. A little bit of black, not too much, because as I say, it's overbearing. And some ultramarine blue. So ultramarine blue is a good alternative if you want to add it to black to make it not so dark. So add a little bit of crimson just to warm it back up. And all I'm going to do is look, the underneath bit, I'm just going to go over again. I'm just going to make it a little bit darker. Don't want to make it too dark, but I do want it to cast a shadow just so it looks like it's crashing in the beach. So as I say, if I put too much black into it, it would bring it really forward. So look at the bottom corners of the paint. See how the black brings it forward? So by having just a little bit of black and not too much, it's fine. And then if we just get some orange and crimson, and because we made that shadow bigger, I'm just making this bottom bit a little bit wider and a bit chunkier. So as I say, I'm just noticing things that would irritate me if I didn't fix them. I don't think any artist is happy with their work. I think even if you're a famous singer and you hear your song on the radio, there must be things about that song that drive you nuts that you wish you could have changed. So I think it's the same with painting. Even if you do a masterpiece, I think there's something that will bother you and that never goes away. So that's totally normal. So what I'm doing now, I'm just linking this area with the white and blue. Because as I say, where we blended over the top, we kind of lost some of our detail. So all I'm doing is just putting it back. Just linking it to that bright yellow. Just making it really nice and soft so you barely notice the colour changes. And all I'm doing is mixing the dark blue and the light blue in the middle. So we've got the brighter colour and the cooler colour interlinking. And again, just linking all the areas. So you don't notice the transitions, they're so subtle. So when we step away from the painting, it should look really real. And then just to finish her off, I'm going to get some of the dark grey that we mixed up. And I've put some painting tape on the painting. I'm just going to create a darker edge on the horizon. So I'm just going to make it really, really dark here on the corners, just to match our now shaded corners. I'm going to do the same on the other side, just so it all matches. And then as we come towards the middle, again, the same rule of thumb. I'm just going to ease off from the dark grey and we'll get a brighter colour. So as we head towards the light, so we've got these dark corners, and then as we head towards the light, we can get some of our orange and crimson, mix a little bit into that dark grey. So we'll create a medium colour, and again, just move towards the middle. I'm not going to go right into the middle, just going slightly either side of it. And then when we have a look at it, if it's too dark, we can just soften it up. You can even use your finger just to soften it up. So let's have a look. So then we've got a clear divide on our horizon now. It's a little shade too dark. But don't worry, look, we can soften it up with our finger. Sometimes that works. And if not, look, we can just dry it and we can just get it over with a bit of orange and just colour it. So we've got this lovely clear definition now between the ocean and the sky. And I think she's pretty much done. So it's taken just over an hour. So I've placed her on a lovely easel. I've signed her in the bottom corner. So you've learned how to do a background underpainting to how to paint a sunset sky. We've got this lovely glow that you've learned how to blend colours, how to blend highlights and shadows, how to put the sky holes in your clouds to make them super hyper realistic, how to create shimmer on your ocean water and paint light on your ocean, how to paint waves, how to paint sea foam, and obviously have a focal point in the middle with your darkened corners. And you've learned all this step by step in just over an hour. How cool is that? So don't forget to tag me with your versions of the painting and any other tutorials that you do at Stewart Paintings, so I can shout them out on here on Instagram and Facebook. And have a great week ahead. Happy painting, and don't forget to like and subscribe and share the videos if you have. Thank you so much for everyone who does. Thank you for the continued support, and happy painting. Take care. Bye.